we have started a recording of this event. There's going to be about 1 hour worth of introductions. On the one hand, from the three of us, very brief introductions to the rationale of this book, followed by interventions from two key discussants today. We have two of the contributors that we have invited to present their take on the book, on the volume, Esther Anaya from Imperial College of London and Marco Te Brommerstrot from University of Amsterdam. Also, there's going to be, we aim for a couple of introductions, very short introductions as well. So probably 3 minutes from several of the book contributors who are today together with us. They will follow Esther and Marco, who have both 15 and 15 minutes to comment on the book. Then we aim for an hour of discussions, as I was saying, to finish then afterwards with a short announcement from the Cycling and Society Research Group with regards to next year's Cycling and Society Symposium. I will start by saying that, as many of you know, this is a volume that has come out of a long effort that has started in 2016 with the Cycling and Society Symposium in Lancaster, which was an event that back in the day was possible to attend in person. We had back then contributors from all over the world, and the aim was to then produce a book that we are happy to say that 9 of those contributors to the symposium managed to contribute as well to the book. That's more than a half of the contributors. This is, many of you would know that this is the second in what we hope will become a book series titled Cycling and Society. The first one was published in 2017, edited by Dave Horton, Paul Rosen, and Peter Cox, drawing on the first Cycling and Society symposium that was held in 2006, even earlier, in Lancaster. Something very important I want to say before passing on the mic to Dennis here, who will make a short overview of the contents of the book, is that this book was dedicated to the memory of Marina Harcourt, an activist and researcher from Brazil, who was one of the contributors of the book and who was killed in a traffic accident, which is more likely a crash, as we would all agree. There's no such things as accidents when it comes to road incidents. And today we are commemorating a year since Marina is no longer with us. I remember her fondly of her presence at Cycling and Society Symposium in Lancaster. I remember hosting her actually at my place as she was traveling from Brazil. So this is a book that has been dedicated to her memory. I will give now the floor to my colleague Dennis to describe a bit the contents of the book. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cosmin, and thank you everyone for participating. We have quite a big audience, and thank you to our discussants, to our keynote discussants who will join us, and we're also happy that this book is out. It took some time and it was not very easy because we were all spread out, but it was a great experience. And so I'll just give a short overview of the book, maybe the rationale of the book, and basically also the cover was quite an important piece of the book, where we chose this cover, the photograph for the cover, which would actually encourage people to think about cycling societies already just by looking at the cover. And the title itself suggests that we are discussing 3 themes, or we were like 3 pillars that we found important for organizing this book, Innovations, Inequalities and Governance. We also, maybe several prominent features of the book is first our argument for the need of expanding cycling research geographies. For instance, why are cycling societies possible in some places and not so easy and are not possible in the others? Why, for instance, Denmark and Netherlands are so prominent, and let's say Hong Kong and Chicago are not included into these sort of cycling societies, why cycling as a practice and mode of transportation is more popular in some places and less popular in others. So this is one thing, and we are happy that we had this very diverse participation from different contributors from different continents. Just excluding Antarctica, we have contributors from South Africa, research on Australia, Europe, Asia, Latin America, Canada. So it's also this dialogue that we try to promote between different stakeholders, activists who participated with shorter contributions like policy briefs. So there is this different format of contributions from different organizations and municipalities, transport engineers, and so on. Also because the organization of the book and writing happened during the pandemic, we included a section on how the cities are transforming during this time and what we should look out for during this time in terms of the future agenda, how this kind of disruption is actually changing cycling practice, how it's changing the place of cycling in urban planning and in terms of mobility as well, urban mobility. Generally, we're trying to delineate this contested space of the cities in different parts of the world as a critical arena of social struggle. And we see this, we see bicycle, or we consider bicycle as a social technological system, not antagonistic to the automobile, but a constellation of practices and identities that exist in relation, but not only to the opposition, in opposition to the car. So there is very little dialogue still between academia, activists, policymakers, and consultants, and many cycling policies remain disconnected from evidence coming from academia. On the other hand, many cycling researchers, they used to be activists, but have weakened their connections with the activist world. We do a short literature review, and we also emphasize that in some parts of the world, cycling research has grown significantly. That is, for instance, United States, the case of United States. In some other countries, cycling has been a very popular practice, but also has become a tool of social distinction, such as China, India, and some other countries. Basically, the idea of the book was diversity of geography or geographic settings, and diversity of voices. And I think this was one of the main ideas. We also talk a little bit about cycling for the urban livability branding, because we don't really talk about rural cycling, and we understand that in one book we cannot consider everything. So it's mostly focused on urban cycling and how cities, for instance, are promoting cycling and different innovations related to cycling as part of their sustainability agenda. Thematically, as I mentioned, we have three big blocks: innovations, inequalities, and governance. Innovations is, so as three co-editors, we actually were we had overlapping, sometimes overlapping chapters, but it was, I think, very useful to start with innovations, sort of future orientation, what is happening with innovations in cycling and cycling research. For instance, innovations section, we have smart cycling, electric bikes, and bike sharing. And actually, with electric bikes, we are moving between two cycling kingdoms, Denmark and China. So the second part, or the second section is inequalities, and here we refer explicitly to inequalities related to marginalization of cycling, but also inequalities within cycling. And particularly here, we have a few contributions on gender and disability, and also how, for instance, female travel choices are shaped within different cities, specifically in Brazil, or for another instance, how female cyclists are often denied cycling expertise or denied having cycling expertise. Governance is the second. We have also policy briefs here, and we have actually one of the contributions that deals with wilderness mobilities in Canada, and also historical account. Another contribution is sort of linking, it's a historical account of bicycle art. The third section is on governance, which is a relatively new concept in cycling research, and we're talking about contributors have different examples of or different forms of governance with mobility transitions in their respective cities, advocacy campaigns, different kinds of advocacy campaigns, and participatory governance. And we also suggest a short agenda as kind of further research directions with, again, four key sort of themes or areas: new inequalities and how cycling, and for instance now with all the innovations, how are the new forms of cycling, modified forms of cycling, are actually contributing to new inequalities. We're also talking about urban transformations and cycling, or we suggest how different forms of everyday mobility are actually becoming cues for social processes in the cities, such as gentrification, for instance, inclusion and exclusion. Micromobilities is also one of our suggestions for further research, how different users negotiate in space in the city, and how cyclists have to deal with these new kinds of mobilities in the cities as well. But also related to COVID-19 and pandemic, the new crises or disruptions. What are the impacts of uncertainty on long distance commuting, logistics, bike sharing demand, and so on. So this is an overview of the book. Just will show again, this is what came out. Actually, I just wanted to say that this is a paperback copy. There is also a hardback copy, which usually goes to the libraries, which doesn't have the photo. So this is actually quite accessible in terms of pricing, at least, paperback. And very importantly, some of the chapters, as we know, books are often inaccessible due to their prices and so on. But some of these chapters, we actually advocated that most of the chapters can go to Routledge created database of sustainability development goals. So many of these chapters will also appear free access online. I just wanted to make this, and thank you again to all my colleagues who are participating in the book. Now we have Katerina.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis, and thanks, Cosmin, and thanks everybody for joining today. I believe that Cosmin and Dennis really covered very thoroughly and presented, a sort of an excellent overview of what the book is about. So I just maybe like to add to this by saying that it has been an absolute pleasure working with you all. It has been an absolute pleasure meeting you all at the Cycling and Society Symposium, working through this book together and learning so much about all the different cases, about all the different types of, cycling practices, the sort of innovative potential that can be embedded in cycling, how to reconfigure and rethink about cycling as an innovative practice. But also, consider the types of exclusions, inequalities, ask questions in relation to power that might be embedded and might be really interesting and helpful to unpack in order to understand, what is the possibility and how to empower cycling. Yeah, I mean, thank you all very much. I know there is, today we have a great group of experts and colleagues who contributed to the book, and I really look forward to the presentations, and all of us do. So I'll just keep it short, and I'll pass over to the next speaker. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Katerina.
Thank you very much, both of you. I think I'm the Uber host here. I have to take over and to introduce the next speaker, who is Esther Anaya. She's a researcher and consultant, and I think her role here is really important because our book has tried to get these two distinctive voices together in the volume, and I think that Esther is the best suited keynote speaker we could have had to discuss our book here. She has also contributed to the book, obviously, with a book chapter on cycling policies. Welcome, Esther, and thank you for joining us today.
And thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Esther Anaya Boj, and I'm here as a contributor to the book, but also as a member of the Cycling and Society Support Committee, which was born in 2016 in Lancaster Uni, the same year that this book was, the idea of this book was also shared between the organizers of the Lancaster Symposium that are here today, and were the editors, Dennis, Cosmin, and Katerina. So thanks for these 5 years of work, because there's 5 years. So sometimes we forget how long it takes, but it's like that. And yeah, thank you, especially because yeah, we've been together for this long, and there has been some transformations. Like, for example, my chapter is not related to the presentation I did in that symposium, and I share this idea with, I remember, Dennis and then the rest of the editors, and you welcome and these kind of transference of knowledge that I was bringing from my consultancy background to the research. So this allowed me to have the space to explore something that I had a long time wanted to explore, which is the subject of the chapter that I wrote for the book, the integrated cycling policy. And yeah, if you are happy with the structure, I propose to first share a little bit about my chapter, and then I would like to share a few ideas, I think 3 ideas, a little bit more in depth. I mean, there could be many of them, a variety of them. The book is very rich and very well organized in that sense. So I'll just highlight 3 things to share with you. Also with the aim of creating and continuing this debate and this dialogue that we initiated with the book as both as co-authors, all of us, and co-editors of the book. So hopefully that will allow us to do that. I'll try to keep my intervention to 15 minutes, but do let me know if I go over it. I'll try to control the time. But Cosmin, if you're chairing, please let me know. So first of all, as I was saying, the integrated cycling policy framework, this was a proposal for a research-connected cycling policy innovation. That's the part of the book where it's embedded in the innovation part. And it's an attempt to put the 2 worlds in dialogue that I just mentioned, policy making and cycling research. And the way I wanted to put them in dialogue is using a very simple, extremely simple, actually, holistic framework that integrates different dimensions of cycling mobility. And yeah, it just starts with a curious gaze over the different dimensions that connect both worlds, and is an invitation to all of us, really. It was like sharing this idea with the community of all of us working in cycling mobility, to cross these boundaries between the different dimensions of cycling mobility and try to integrate them in policy somehow, with the aim, the ultimate aim, to make cycling mobility more inclusive and just. So to have a scenario in which cycling could be available for everyone. So I made a few points in this chapter that I'd like to share with you. These are a few arguments that I put on the table. The first one is that I argue that in order to integrate cycling policy in transport and urban planning and policy, which was already an idea that had been already worked by other authors like Dave Bannister before, but my argument is that cycling policy needs to be in itself integrated. In other words, the framework that I propose advocates for an operational change, really. It's cycling policy needs to take into account the different dimensions of cycling mobility, as I was saying, and not only infrastructure, which is normally the one that we find more commonly related to cycling policy. So there is a difference between cycling policy integration with other transport policies or with other sustainability policies, any kind of policies. As I was saying, Dave Bannister and also Moshe Givoni were arguing before, but also there is this concept of integrated cycling policy in which not only infrastructures, but I also add the dimensions of the planning instruments, the regulations, training and coaching programs, the governance, which is also one section of this book in itself, and the communication dimension, and also social and cultural movements and contexts. So a couple of more highlights that I would like to highlight about my chapter is that, going back to John Arry's point of the universal accessibility of public policies. So basically, Arry already in 2007 was arguing that public policies should be universally accessible. This is kind of a basic idea, but it's a very good reminder that all involved in policy making, we need to have into our minds in everything that we do in this work of policy related planning and design. And so going back to this point of the universal accessibility of public policies, it could be argued that the goal of cycling policy should not be only the promotion of cycling, but making cycling accessible for everyone. For me, this is a shift, and we cease to use this paternalistic approach of promotion, in which there seems to be a hierarchy between those who know what's best and the rest. And it moves towards a more collaborative approach that I will later mention a little bit more about that. Another point that I wanted to make is that I also did a bit of literature review, and in this chapter, I try to map which previous studies tackle any of these different dimensions of cycling policies. And there are a lot of gaps. I would highlight one of the main gaps is basically the study of the processes in which cycling policies are created and delivered. I think we still don't know enough. I think as scientists and as researchers, we should start getting more involved with policy making and trying to explore it, maybe even be part of it and study it much more often than we do. And finally, final point that I would like to do about my chapter is about the politics of cycling. And this is not only about cycling. The politics go beyond. And in this integrated cycling policy, we need to further recognize automobility as part of this context, as Horton and other authors had pointed out before, and should feature both push and pull measures. So we're also talking about the access to cycling and the restrictions to automobility and the resistance to the system of automobility, for example. So those are some of the points I would like to highlight about my chapter. And then I would like to move on the next 10 minutes to these 3 ideas that I would like to share with you today. As I was saying, there are many more ideas. It's been difficult for me to kind of select which ones I wanted to share with you, because those of you who have the book or have been reading the book or are obviously co-authors and editors, you know how full and how rich it is of different ideas and connections, even when some time has already passed since these chapters and these contributions were written. And the first idea that I would like to share with you today is about the future, the idea of the future. I was going back to Dave Horton, Paul Rosen, and Peter Cox's edited book, Cycling and Society, that Cosmin was mentioning before, that was published by Ashgate. Now it's also in Routledge, if I'm certain. It was published in 2007, also a fruit of these Cycling and Society symposiums. And it was dedicated to cycling futures, just like that, to cycling futures. So are we already in the cycling futures?
Yeah.
Thank you, Angela. So probably we are still in this fluid notion of futures, and as our relation with the future as researchers is something that I would like to share with you today. I mean, all of these 3 ideas, I don't have the answers, but I'd like to share my concerns or my explorations with you, and hopefully contribute also to the question and answer space that will come afterwards. But yeah, this includes cycling futures, cycling utopias, dystopias. This seems to be like new fields of research within cycling research. And the range of futures and scenarios, the challenge of complexity, the uncertainty, the impact of the pandemic that the editors embedded so well, and caught on the fly of editing the book in an admirable way, I would say, because it was not, obviously, it went across from before the pandemic to after, well, not after, but during the pandemic. So they had to incorporate this concept, and I think they did it really well. We also have the urgency of the climate crisis, and we have been having all of this time the stickiness of automobility. So to me, these projections of the future seem to be linked with the concept of innovations that are one of the key concepts of the book, as we were saying before. And innovations are not necessarily something new. They can be a different way of using something old, and you know what I'm talking about probably. And that also highlights the role of the history in our studies, in our research, in our interests in cycling and society. But also it highlights the importance of changes and transitions and how to capture them. And I think most of us are doing some kind of evaluation exercise here, like trying to capture the impact of what is going on, to observe, try to map the changes and analyze the changes, how they work. And I think this is a very valuable contribution that we can do as researcher and as other people interested in the cycling phenomenon. As Nicolas, Eva, and other co-authors were mentioning in chapter 3, it's crucial to interrogate representations of cyclists and cycling in innovation discourses. So representations to me and discourse are intimately related to cycling in diversity and inclusion, which is my following point, my second point that I wanted to make. The diversity of cycling, also one of the parts of the book is also in relation to this. I would like to question these concepts. We talk about diversity and inclusion, by diversity from what? From the men that are white, male in Lycra, the mammal figure, included in what? Inclusion in what? Who are the gatekeepers? Who is guarding the fences of this inclusion? All of us should periodically ask ourselves, why do we use these terms, I think, and other terms, of course. But these in particular, these are relational terms. These terms put in relation different items that we still have to define clearly. And I think we need to make that effort, even if their nature of these items of cycling, of automobility, is a fluid nature. I think we need to make that effort. We need to be explicit about them. And I think we are using these terms now of diversity and inclusion because of the context of automobility is quite obvious. There is a domination, there's a power relation there. So some of the questions I posed before, like who's guarding the fences, who has the power, is quite clear. However, I think we need to reinvent the language that will take us to represent cycling as a seamless, integrated part of our lives or our societies and our environments. I think this might be a provocative idea for some, but I would like to make us think or act as we were already there. Sometimes I think maybe it can be useful for us to think and act as if we already had the scenario that we want to have, the desired scenario in which all these power relations have been, if not erased, at least softened, and everyone can have their space, their access, their expression, etc. So yeah, that's for me a bit of a provocative idea for me, myself included. So this is something that I wanted to share with you today. There is something also about channeling the energy of anger that we might have into these futures, into this energy to act upon these futures and create futures and make these futures that are already there, make them possible. This anger can come, for example, from the grief of the loss of friends and colleagues to road violence, as Cosmin was saying before, with the loss of Marina Harcourt. And this anger, we try to, at least, that's my proposal, to transform it into something that can lead to changes in the future, hopefully. So following with this idea of diversity of cycling, and it's also embedded in the book, I think that the notion of transferability of cycling policies, I think this is also an act of colonialism in terms of knowledge colonialism, using the models always, as a reference model, the Dutch and the Danish cities. And I liked how Dominic Villeneuve put it in the afterword. He was saying, we need to adapt rather than adopt, yeah? So for me, this is part of this post-colonial view in which we need to be clear about the situated knowledge, where we are speaking from, what is our context, and how that influences the way we see and we express and we study and we do research about cycling. And I think in this sense, it's very important creating a sense of belonging. And with this, I borrow this concept from Julian Ageman, with a co-production or collaborative science or citizen science approach. I think the sense of belonging is what's violated in cycling inequalities that are portrayed in this book. We have several examples in the section of this book. And these violations, I think naturally they seek restitution through bottom-up creativity and resistance that I think we need to put much more attention in them, try to capture them, analyze them, study them as well, take part in them with active research, and give the importance that I think they are having in this specific moment in time specifically, but also historically. So Yeah, in the governance section of the book, there are examples of this situation, that, as I was saying, of these top-down initiatives that shape cycling policies. But I think we need to do much more of this and go beyond the concepts of inequalities towards justice and fairness principles, in which population groups that are more in need or could benefit more from cycling, they can obtain the access to this cycling. So I would like to then, my third idea would be around the concept of conflicts. It's also, I think, quite present in the book. I'm concerned I only have 1 minute, but just very briefly, I like the reflection that you co-editors do in the introduction of leaving behind the language of war. Yeah, I quote, our argument is that neither the car nor the automotive industry essentially opposes the bicycle. We wish to demonstrate this complex relationship in this book. I think this is a very important aim of the book. I would align with it, and I think that's beneficial for all of us in any of the sides that we might take. But leaving this language of war behind. And I think this is one of the aspects of cycling inequalities, the marginalization of cycling, as you continue to explain in the introduction of the book. But there's the double whammy of cycling marginalization and the inequalities embedded in cycling systems and practices. I believe in the same evolutionary psychological pathways. This double whammy acts in the same way. It acts by tagging, categorizing, authoring, creating separation and opposition that actually in our brains are survival strategies that the brain just creates to survive. It's an evolutionary response that we still have. This categorization is done by default. So to turn it around requires intentionality. And I think we need to be very aware of that. I think a potential roadmap to approach this would be first, a need to be aware by all parties involved that there is this, in this relational game, that there is this separation, that we are creating this separation. And when we deconstruct these oppositions, I think we can create opportunities for relation. If we don't deconstruct this, if we don't go through this process, I think it will be much more difficult to create a space for relation, for communication, for dialogue. And what is more, if the deconstruction of the automobility war against the bicycle is co-produced in a way that there is a dialogue between all parts, as I was saying, I think then the change is a possibility. And I would leave it here, my reflections on this book, just a few of them to share with you. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther.
Thank you, Esther.
Food for thought and very interesting points you have raised. Without further ado, I will give the floor now to Marco T. Bromerström, who's a professor of urban mobility futures, one of the few cycling professors indeed, who has contributed with a book chapter as well, written together with Anna Nikolaeva, Rob Raven, and James Ranson on indeed one of the points that Esther was making here, one of her contention points, the cycling futures and the smart cycling futures. Thank you very much, Marco, for joining us.
Yes, there I am. Can I also share my screen, if possible? That would be nice. Thank you for having me. I've heard already so many intelligent things, so I was actually just preparing to give my congratulations to you for the great work that you put forward, the three of you as editors of this volume. But now I feel that I also have to go a bit beyond that. So I really like seeing all of you here. It's a great group. So thank you for the opportunity, and especially I really enjoyed seeing you again, Cosmin, as one of the alum of our cycling city summer school. Back then, I was, I think, one of the few cycling professors, but now Germany installed 7 of them. So they are quickly taking over that role. I'm still not allowed to share my screen, so I will just continue without. And you have to imagine. Thinking about the speaker before me, I wanted to also give a handout, give some kudos to Jacques de la Rocca, the singer of Rage Against the Machine, who also taught me that anger is a gift. So let's keep that very, very central. It's an emotion that can help us forward. I'm speaking from one of those colonial contexts where you actually in your book actively try to expand or escape away from the Netherlands. But I think that the context that I'm in could also benefit from a more yes, there we are. Could also benefit from a more critical reflection on what it actually is that we are looking at. Because I think in the Netherlands and maybe also abroad, it's often, I think, not very well understood. I think you can now see the picture, right, on my screen. Anybody knows who this is that we're looking at? Well, so we are looking at
John Lennon.
Yeah, exactly. So this is Yoko Ono and John Lennon. In 1969, they are celebrating their honeymoon, and they were traveling the world. They were just married, obviously. And this is one of the famous pictures of that time in the Hilton Hotel in Amsterdam. They visited Amsterdam because especially Yoko Ono was really interested in the counter movement that was happening. The youth that went to the streets and demanded a different type of society. So I often ask people also in the Netherlands why they think that in this specific picture, there is a white, rickety, Dutch style bike on the bed, single speed, back pedal brake, sitting up straight. And especially the Dutch would fail to give a very thoughtful answer to that. So I could also ask it to you, but in this context, I will just make you ponder about why is this bicycle in bed with John Lennon and Yoko Ono. Because one of the obvious answers here, I think you would all know, if you think about this a bit deeper, is that the bicycle was here as a symbol. As you can also see, there's a pigeon, a white pigeon. And I think we all know what the symbol of that is, but also the bicycle at the time, in the Netherlands especially, was a symbol, not a symbol of going faster from A to B, but a symbol for a radically different society. It was the counter movement at the time, the provos, the gnomes, Stop the Child Murder, these kinds of counter movement organizations that embraced the bicycle as a powerful symbol for what they called anti-brutal capitalism, where the car then represented the brutal capitalism that these people were opposing. The idea that the society was a machine, that all our cities had to function for economic growth. And they won, you could say. And that's what we all think. Because what happened in the Netherlands is that this symbol, they won, and I just want to go back to the metaphor of the war. They won an important battle in the streets of Amsterdam, especially, literally a battle against the army. So it literally was urban warfare. They won it, and that's often the end of the story, right? So that brought us back into cycling utopia or whatever. But what actually happened, and there's a very good recent PhD thesis from Henk-Jan Dekker on this in Eindhoven. You could say what happened is instead of fighting and winning over the technocracy and using the bicycle as a symbol for a radically different society, instead what they did was signing a truce. A very violent truce, a contested truce until this day. The Netherlands, I would say, did not become a bicycle utopia, but the bicycle became part of the traffic engineering technocrats. And the bicycle and the cyclists got their part of the cake. They got their part of the road, got their safe bicycle infrastructure that we all know and are interested in. But this is also the Netherlands currently. Bicycle highways, smart bicycles, smart bicycle helmets, commuter cyclists, smart traffic lights, swap feeds, fat bikes, mobility as a service. So the bicycle really became a part of the dominant narrative of traffic engineering, where being on the way is basically seen as a disutility, something of a space where you're always in conflict with others. And the bicycle became one mode that could help us create a future where somehow in this future, everybody would go fast from A to B. And what happened in the same time is that we all became the fish in the water. Ivan Illich wrote about this in the 1970s, talking about this in the terms of radical monopoly. The choices that are made here, the choices that we make to put cycling on the table of traffic engineering, these choices become unquestioned. We take them for granted. We don't question the underlying assumptions in the Netherlands, which makes us often hurt the fish in the water that do not know what the water is. So if you come to the Netherlands, you will find out that if you ask people why they bike, for instance, they don't give you a straightforward answer, because cycling is something that is not reflected upon. It's something that is taken for granted. But we could question if this picture is why John Lennon and Yoko Ono were in bed with a bicycle. Were they thinking about the song, Imagine Bicycle Highways, going fast from A to B? I doubt it. As I said, I think cycling for them represented a radically different future, and this was not the future that they were probably going for. Actually, this is a small secret, but John Lennon was a huge car collector. He owned lots of Aston Martins, and before going into the Hilton Hotel, let's see if we can go back to the picture, arriving here in a huge Rolls Royce, and he was very proud of that. So it was especially Yoko Ono and especially the counter movement that brought this bicycle here, but not to Imagine Bicycle Highways, I would argue. So in our chapter in the book, we were delighted to be able to unravel, for the sake of this book, unravel the imaginaries behind this. So the imaginaries behind, or the underlying assumption behind what is cycling, what is it, and what should it be in the future, in the contested future. What is the cycling future? And we looked for that. We studied the scripts of innovation of 86 different bicycle innovations that were around a couple of years ago. Most of them are either gone by now, or at least in very problematic circumstances. But the scripts of these innovations, so looking at what story they are telling, could help us to understand the underlying narratives. Because these narratives, that's the key point, these narratives are not mirrors of reality. They are not things that we can just objectively research as academics, but they profoundly shape reality. These innovations are literally agents of the future of cycling. And what we found, not a surprise, but that as much as the present is contested, also the future is contested. Within these innovations, there are very contested ideas of what the future of cycling holds. Is it a future of adventure, or is it a future of control? Some innovations try to combine both by giving a controlled feeling of adventure. Another thing that we found very contested was the notion of safety that has already been covered today as well. So is safety a responsibility of the cyclist, and should he or she carry all kinds of devices for that? This week, I think we all, or many of us, read this piece on how autonomous driving now requires cyclists to wear beacons, for instance, and if they don't, that will become a problem. So is safety of cyclists something, a responsibility of the cyclist, him or herself? Or is it the responsibility of the system, as some innovations are targeting systemic elements? Or is it the responsibility of those that bring in the danger? Very interesting contested futures come to the fore. So I want to close with, again, thanking the editors of the book for bringing this all together. I think it does a very good job in uncovering or unraveling cycling. It brings together a kaleidoscope of academic contributions around cycling and its complex relations with cities and societies. And that also rings true for what I try to do myself. I also hope to play different roles as an academic, but also as an activist, also as a cyclist. I even owned a bicycle shop, and I'm a father and a son, a husband. So in that sense, all these things come together. I think that the book does, one of the key contributions of the book is to bring together these different elements, and not only in terms of domains or context, but also in terms of bringing together different roles that we all can play. The aim of the book, quote, the aim of the book is to show that the bicycle is a social technological system not antagonistic to the automobile, a constellation of practices and identities that exist in relation, but not only in opposition to the car. The bike as a unique socio-material object and mode of transportation has a life and valence of its own. However, cycling mobility is often marginalized or sidelined and are used as a policy fix and a tool for promoting green thinking agendas, livable city branding, leading to deeper and new socio-spatial divides. And I would argue that this is also true in the Netherlands and the way that we currently use cycling here. So we also need a critical perspective on that, which is very often lacking by just assuming that all life is great in Copenhagen and Amsterdam, and it isn't. I also think this comes already much closer to probably what John Lennon and Yoko Ono were thinking in 1969 during their honeymoon. So with that, I want to close, but also by drawing one final line that hopefully comes out of this, because I think you can be very proud also of bringing together the Cycling and Society group. And I hope that we can keep building links with another group that has been emerging with a similar idea to bring cycling to the fore as a new narrative generator, a new boundary object, as you will, at the Cycling Research Board meetings that we are hosting next year in Amsterdam in October. So I really hope that this book can also bring together these lines. And I want to thank you all again. Looking forward to the next contributions.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank you very much, Marco. And very nice to hear critical thoughts, particularly from Netherlands, where we oftentimes do what Esther was rightly saying, that we have this kind of a colonized view of the cycling world coming from the Netherlands, whereas you brought a much needed indeed critical perspective of what cycling looks like indeed, even in Netherlands. We would like now to invite some of the other contributors to the book who have been also with us this evening to do short presentations of a couple of minutes of their respective contributions and book chapters or policy notes that they have written. I have here a running order. I have asked both me and Dennis if those who will be present without today and have contributed to the book want to say something. So I will just go in the order that they are in the book, and I will give the floor to, I'm not sure if Leticia Lemos is here with us today. She said that she might come, but I'm not sure if she eventually made it.
No, I don't see Leticia.
I don't seem to see her. I think I have already seen Isabel Clement from Wheels for Wellbeing. Am I right? Or she has not managed to?
I think she also was here, but she...
That's what I remember. She might have dropped in the meantime. Not sure if Nicolas Scott, maybe?
Nicolas also...
Okay. Bruce, definitely Bruce knocked in at the door just a while ago. And hello Bruce, good seeing you. And thank you for joining us indeed from Lancaster, where we had the Cycling and Society Symposium event that made this book possible. Welcome, and you certainly had a very interesting contribution, which was trying to make the case of the strong link, apparently, that many of us didn't know between cycling and cinema.
Yeah, thanks. I just run straight from a lecture. I just caught a bit of Marco's presentation, but it overlaps with what I write about. The focus, so just very briefly, I mean, the focus of my chapter was principally on fine art, but it intersects with the book I wrote on cycling on screen. But the argument is quite similar. So I look in the chapter at the proliferation of bicycles in modern art, how they crop up everywhere. So it starts with that, with a sort of asking why that is. What's the fascination? And the answer that I play with, and this is where it overlaps with what Marco was talking about a bit, is that it's to do with the meaning of the bicycle. So I think a lot of sort of scholarship on and advocacy around bicycles thinks about them as functional objects, sort of transportation devices, and is much less concerned with all the other sort of investments and associations that they have for us. Why it's interesting to look at bicycles on screen or bicycles in paintings and sculpture and performance art is that taking a bicycle out of one context, placing it in another context, in the context of a painting, for example, or a frame of a film, turns it into a symbol or a sign. And in the process, it renders it it gives it textuality and invites us to interrogate and analyze its meaning. So what's interesting about bicycles on film and art that deals with bicycles is it draws our attention to meaning, and all the sorts of meanings that bicycles have for us. And this encompasses social class. These are quite sort of, historically sort of dynamic meanings. It's associated with modernity, industrial modernity. It's associated with gender, particular concepts around gender and relations of gender, with age, with national identity. The meanings that bicycles have change according to the context in which they appear or the context they move through. So in the chapter, I was particularly interested in how we can use sort of art that deals with the bicycle to think about the meaning of the bicycle. And the two key case studies I use are the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei and the Austrian artist Rainer Gernal, both of whom have been almost obsessive in their exploration of the meaning of the bicycle and their use of bicycles as tools or components of their artworks. And for both of them, this is where the chapter intersects with the overall agenda of the book. For both of them, the bicycle, one of the principal meanings of the bicycle is resistance. They're devices of resistance, or they're associated with different forms of political resistance. So this is partly to do with the history of the object, but it's also to do with its properties. They're mobile, so they mobilize us. They put people into motion, they put ideas into motion. So that's a brief encapsulation of what I was exploring.
Thank you very much, Bruce. And sorry, I said it was on cycling and cinema. You have indeed a book written on this topic, and the contribution was on cycling and modern art more generally. Thank you very much. I think Gail Jennings is here with us, actually from South Africa. She's a mobility consultant in Cape Town, and she has had a contribution as well. If you can hear us, Gail, and wanted to briefly introduce what your contribution to the book was about.
Thank you. I think one of the challenges of bicycle research in South Africa is that there's so little of it, and yet there's so much that is worth researching and worth trying to understand. So it's a real challenge to try and decide when you take on any kind of research project or something that you want to focus on is what aspect of cycling I am going to focus on, because there's just so much, and in the end my research is fairly prosaic to some extent compared to what else there is that could be investigated, because we still, I don't think we can even claim to be a starter or an emerging cycling country or cycling city, despite what people might possibly read in social media or might have been led to believe. I mean, cycling is a very, very minor mode in South Africa. And so to some extent, the work that seemed to be the most sort of useful as a consultant and a researcher to look at is the kind of what might seem very sort of old hat if you're studying in Europe, but why do people cycle as opposed to why people don't cycle? Because the little research that has been done in most African cities and Cape Town has been looking at cycling as a poverty alleviation intervention and trying to why people don't cycle. But I'm more interested in trying to understand the narratives around trying to sell cycling as a mode to people who do in fact own cars and who do drive, and that is their primary way of getting around. And why this was interesting to me is that there's an emerging narrative in South African policy about cycling as a congestion mitigation intervention and as a climate mitigation intervention, which means that the target of that kind of marketing is very specifically people who contribute to congestion and to climate, which is people who drive. But the narratives around selling cycling are still around things like poverty alleviation, or there seems to be no insights into why somebody who owns a car would wish to choose cycling as a mode when it is the most dangerous and unpleasant mode to take in South Africa. The risk ratio is really high. About 1.5% of trips might be made by bicycle in Cape Town, but the percentage of deaths is about 3%. So it's really not an intuitive way to travel. So that's the kind of background as to what my chapter is about, is trying to then understand by interviewing people who do own cars and who are, I call them intentional cyclists, people who are not, who have had to make a very clear decision to cycle as their mode. And one of the people that I interviewed is in fact here in our launch, and he contributed poetry to my chapter. And if you read my chapter for only that reason, it's for Christo's poetry. But so trying to understand why you might choose this mode, which is not intuitively something that you would want to get around in a city that is bicycle hostile, for want of any other way of putting it. So the narratives in marketing are very similar to what you would expect if you're trying to sell cycling to somebody who doesn't own a car. And I was interested then there's this new emerging narrative, which is selling cycling as a climate intervention. So cycle because it's green, because it's environmentally friendly, and this seems to be the way cycling marketing has been pitched to car owners. So I was then interested to interview people and try and understand, is this why they cycle? Why do you in fact cycle when you own a car? Is it because you're a climate activist, or you have some kind of green goal? What really could be your underlying purpose to cycle? So I don't want to tell you why. The main reason is that people cycle because I think it would be much more interesting to read. But needless, it's not something that most marketing agencies think of selling cycling around. Or in fact, it really ultimately, every person that I interviewed talked about how in the end, it's something that quite simply makes them happy, which is not really something that a transport engineer can get their head around. So, that's just a wonderful chapter to write. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Gail. I think we still have 3 contributors that would be nice to hear from them as well. But as we are pressed with time, I would ask each and every one of you to keep it to around 3 minutes, so we can hear from each and every one of us, of you, and then be able to engage in a discussion, the whole lot of us. So I'm gonna pass the floor now to Nicolas Scott, who's joining us from Canada.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Nice to see you, Cosmin. Sorry for coming in late there. I get the time zones mixed up. Sorry, are we just sort of mentioning our chapter and locating it within the collection?
Yeah, that would be great if you could say a couple of things about your contributions. Sure.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what I love about this book is the diversity of materials, and just like I love how many different pieces of cycling are packed into one text. But my piece was about ecology, political ecology. So I was thinking, how can cycling be performed and acted in an ecologically good way? And I really tried to approach that question broadly, and I came up with kind of 3 ideas. So I'm kind of critical, especially in the Canadian North American context, how when people think of the environment, environmental crisis, they think of climate change. And I can see the reasons for that, but certainly there are other environmental crises interconnected with climate change, specifically habitat degradation, as well as mass extinction and the loss of non-human persons. So I see those as 2 different ecological problems, and I was like, okay, are cycling practices related to those? How would those all interconnect? So I looked at cycling kind of as transport, and kind of your classic analysis where you're looking at the equities, access, inclusion, and I looked at the gender imbalances in Canada, and I was thinking for, behind some of the reasons for that. And then I kind of moved on to looking at how maybe non-intentional cycling trips expose people to nature, because this is what I found in my research now the last 5, 6, 7 years. It kind of just echoed what Copenhagen has known for a long time, which is that people don't really bike for the environment, they bike for nature though. So I really found all these Canadians cycling around trying to connect with nature. So I explored how that might expand into empathy for non-human persons. Like, what is it about those interactions with nature, broadly speaking, whether it's an ocean, an animal, a plant, a tree? I found lots of examples. So I explored how people might come to think of non-human beings, or more than human beings, and environments, if you like, in more empathetic ways. And then finally, I explored this process kind of like what I call de-roading. How can cycling be part of a process of unbuilding, disassembling the car city, the car road, the car highway? There's cities doing it in North America. They're unbuilding super highways in cities. It's so exciting. But it happens on a small scale too. And it's happening where I live in Vancouver right now at a pretty interesting scale. We're thinking about, finally transforming road space. Maybe not as quickly as we would all like, but yeah. So that's about it. Thanks, Cosmin.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. Thank you. And we will stay in the Americas with a contribution from Thomas van Lecke and his colleagues at Despacio. He's no longer with Despacio, consultancy based in Bogota, and he's starting a PhD in Manchester, actually, but he will be telling us a bit more about his policy brief about cycling in Bogota.
Thank you, Cosmin. In fact, I wrote this chapter together with Patricia, the director of Despacio, before I started off my PhD journey, which I've just started this semester. And I will be researching cycling infrastructure, actually, from the University of Manchester. So it was a great introduction to the field, and it was great to start off with some reflection of my own before diving into literature now at this point in my PhD. So it's a very short piece, the piece we wrote. It's only 4 pages, so I'll keep it short as well. And I think one of the things we highlight in this chapter is the importance of quality, and oftentimes, the discussion about infrastructure or different kinds of policies, we kind of miss the question of what is actually being done in terms of those policies, and is it really effective? So, for instance, in Colombia, a lot of infrastructure projects are actually not good at all. They can even worsen the situation for cyclists in some situations. And I think we all know a project of this kind, specifically in contexts where cycling infrastructure is not normal, where it's something new, where governments have to learn how to implement it. Lack of budget also can be an important consideration. And we highlight the case of the cycling infrastructure manual, which Despacio was the author of in companionship with other consultancy firms for the Ministry of Transport of Colombia. This document was finished in 2016 and was later adopted as a legal standard for cycling infrastructure projects. So we find this document has had some very positive impacts on cycling infrastructure development in Colombia. So on the one hand, the power of the document is that it's a legal document, and so it gives a legal defense to technical decisions made in the planning process, which can be very important as the current planning instruments, which can be very important in Colombia. It's a very legal, bureaucratic situation with urban design, and having a document in the hand can be very important to justify taking away road space, for instance, from cars, which can be the difference between a good project and a completely useless project if you have to do it on the sidewalk. And on the other hand, one of the major advances by this manual is the kind of technical indications it gives, which were often not taken into account, or at least not standardized across the country or even across different municipal administrations in the same city. So for instance, in Bogota, it's famous for its cycling infrastructure, but these practices have changed a lot over time. There's been a learning process, and I think this cycling infrastructure manual represents a very important step in this process. Now, we can also think about it a bit more critically, and I think this was being alluded to before in some of the interventions. I think Marco mentioned this, that the Netherlands is always copied and it's seen as this example, and maybe we should think about this critically. And in fact, the cycling manual of Colombia was based in many ways on the Crow manual, famous Crow manual in the Netherlands. And you know, we can wonder if this is good to copy certain aspects or to use certain aspects. But again, in 4 pages, we weren't able to dive deep into this. We highlight the advantages, the kind of progress made in terms of quality of infrastructure, especially in Colombia, a place where municipal administrations are always happy to say, okay, we constructed X amount of infrastructure, maybe we did 20 kilometers, but kilometers is not the same as quality, you know. And of course, the bicycle lanes are not the only kind of infrastructure that is good for cycling. So yeah, an update from Colombia.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Good luck, obviously, with your PhD that you're starting in Manchester, and I hope to see you sometimes very soon in Manchester as well, when I get back there from Romania, where I'm currently based. Last but not least, we are hearing from Margot Abord-de-Chantillon, who is still doing a PhD, as far as I can remember, at the University of Lyon, who has written a chapter on women's experience of bicycle repair and maintenance in France and Australia. Can you hear us, Margot? We can see you, but we cannot hear you just yet.
Oh, she disappeared.
She's still here and she's trying to connect with audio.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, we can. Hello, welcome.
Sorry, this is very unpractical. Hi everyone, I'm very happy to be here with you today. And I would like to tell you about bicycle repair, which is the topic of the paper I wrote for this wonderful book. Thank you so much for having me as a guest writer on this book. So the paper I wrote is titled Feminine Velonomy, Women's Experiences of Bicycle Repair in France and Australia. And I focus on repair because I believe that repairing a bicycle is a very important skill that many cyclists consider to be necessary, but which is mastered in a very heterogeneous way. Not everyone learns how to repair a bicycle, and this difference turns out to be heavily gendered. So I use a theoretical background of feminist phenomenology in order to bring the following arguments. My argument is that the patriarchal background in which bicycle repair and maintenance practices occur limits women's involvement and willingness to engage in bicycle repair. So what I wanted to do here is to avoid essentialization, because very often when we talk about gender, and this is also the case when we talk about gender in the frame of cycling, we can easily tend to believing that the differences that are spotted between men and women's behavior are due to the very different nature of men and women. And I think it's very important to put some emphasis on the systems that men and women are placed in that transform their experiences of cycling and of that very specific practice, which is bicycle repair. And bicycle repair is heavily gendered because it is something related to bicycles, which we know very well is a very gendered object, but also because repair also is related with technical work and manual work. And these are also extremely masculine environments. And so what I do in this paper is that I focus on the spaces of repair and maintenance, and I show that they are very masculine and actually patriarchal. And the difference between masculine and patriarchal is that masculine means there are many men in this space, but patriarchal means that the masculinity of this space reproduces itself. And so that's obviously the problem that we need to worry about. It's okay, like it's not an issue if there are more men cycling maybe, or if there are more men in bicycle repair and maintenance spaces. It is an issue if women who want to engage with these spaces are actively rejected and excluded. And this is, to my view, what's happening. And so when I surveyed cyclists in Lyon in France and in Melbourne in Australia, I realized that spaces of repair are very masculine. There are more men in these spaces. Men are the ones who hold the most skills in repair and maintenance, but that these are also spaces where women receive inappropriate attention. They are asked personal questions in times when it's absolutely not relevant. Their outfits are commented on. They receive help when they do not ask for it, and so on. So women coming into a space of repair will receive attention that is not proportional to the action they want to engage with. A third very important aspect of spaces of repair and maintenance is the denial of expertise. So women in spaces of repair see their expertise denied. So it was very striking to discuss with female mechanics, female professional mechanics, and to hear that they regularly see their expertise denied by male customers with no mechanical skills. So this was a very interesting thing, because if it happens to professional mechanics, you can imagine how it happens to people like me, maybe the average woman who has maybe some skills in repair, but would not consider herself an expert. So these three aspects of environments of repair the masculinity of repair, the inappropriate attention that women receive, and the denial of expertise, they each contribute to delegitimizing the presence of women in these spaces. And more importantly, they reduce the possibilities that are given to women to acquire new repair skills, and women become uncomfortable in these spaces. Some of them leave these spaces, and when they stay there, they are dependent on men in these spaces. So that is, to me, the most important argument of this paper. I then also describe strategies that some female bike mechanics developed in order to resist, but to my opinion, these strategies are less interesting than considering the system, this patriarchal system that we need to question and transform if we want to make cycling more inclusive for women. Because I believe that there cannot be any gender balance in cycling if women are not given the opportunities to learn how to repair their bicycle in a safe, peaceful, and respectful environment. So yes, that's what I wanted to tell you about. And thanks again to the editors of this beautiful book for putting this all together, and for this event today, which is extremely nice.
Thank you very much, Margot. And as with Thomas, good luck with your PhD as well. I hope to see you in Lyon next year, as I will be traveling to Lyon for research purposes. I realized that we have missed Dominic Villeneuve, who has written a postface of our book, which is not a contribution per se, but he would like to add a couple of things about the situation in Quebec, where he's a professor of transport and mobility at University of Laval. Hello, Dominic.
Hello, and thank you. I just wanted to do a quick update. First of all, thanks for the editors and for all the book authors, because it was a really wonderful and quite useful book to move forward. So that being said, in my postface, I write about maybe that we have a new window of opportunity for better cycling infrastructure, that COVID-19, with all its bad things, might have had this one positive outcome. And I just wanted to state that yesterday in the province of Quebec, we had municipal elections, and the mayor from Montreal, who made a lot of improvement to the cycling infrastructure, was re-elected on a promise to expand them and make them permanent, the new ones she did. And she won 52% of the vote on a three people race. So really, really successful election of someone who's pro-cycling in the second largest city in Canada. So just a quick update. It's a good thing to share with everyone here.
Definitely, Dominic. Thank you very much. Good news from Canada, indeed. So we have heard from quite a few of our contributors to the book. I think now we're going to have a free discussion for the remaining about half an hour, a bit more. A bit more, yes. So I'm not sure if Katerina is still around with us, if she can hear us and wants to rejoin. Dennis has written quite a lot of things, as I could see, so he might want to take over and start with some thoughts on what has been discussed so far.
Yes, I would like to summarize, and I would like to thank everybody, participants, listening to what the keynote speakers have pointed out, and all the contributors, because it's actually nice to have this resume or a little summary of the chapters and sort of post-reflection. So also for the academics sort of to reflect as fish in the water and the things we're doing. On the note about the political changes, actually the bad news from Lisbon, the cycling mayor, or the mayor, at least one of the mayors, the recent mayors who was promoting cycling agenda, And personally, I've seen a lot of things changing in Portugal, which is also not considered to be a cycling society, but Lisbon has changed a lot. And we noticed this a little bit in the introduction. He was not re-elected. Just recently, now I would like to go to the notes that our keynotes have made. These key points and comments about resistance, futures, diversity, the idea of leaving the war behind, changing the language, and maybe some other provocations from myself. Basically, just recently, I was at the exhibition of Ai Weiwei in Lisbon, and the entrance to the exhibition is actually his big piece of these bicycles. So it actually, again, we see this symbolism that is being recycled. The symbolism of bicycles is symbols of resistance. Of course, we know Ai Weiwei is a dissident artist who has been moving around the world and now actually found his residence in Portugal. He shows this as his centerpiece, and association with China is a kind of I don't know, in his view, a dictatorship, but bicycle here is actually a kind of tower of bicycles, is marking the entrance into this resistance domain. And this I can connect with this visibility of bicycle. It's a seeming visibility as a resistance tool, as on the photograph with John Lennon and Yoko Ono, where they show the bicycle and this sort of whiteness and peace that it has the connotation of this. I think the idea of the cycling utopias and what both keynote speakers mentioned, and I think this is what we're discussing with students, the scenarios for urban mobility and the place of cycling. We talked with Cosmin on this. It's interesting to see how the imaginary of future is depicted on this image, where the drones and bicycles are the key sort of transportation and moving modes. We have the air and we have the ground. So these two different spaces are being utilized, and it seems that there is nothing else in between. Yes, I think the futures is exciting, but also its unpredictability of the futures. What is happening? How will the cycling policy now go in Quebec, and how it will go in Lisbon? Will this change? Will this get better? What will be the quality? And will the new mayors, for instance, in Lisbon, actually build up on what has been constructed already? So it's quite difficult to say, because it's about the austerity of the pandemic as well, where funds are being cut, and also the plans for infrastructure and expansion, and this kind of optimistic idea of accommodating and maybe expanding cycling infrastructure have also been under question in some places. Then I actually think it's a very good point about what Esther mentioned about the diversity and thinking about relationality of different items. I would just say that, yes, that's maybe also one of the ideas we try to maybe go beyond. And this was one of the criticisms, actually, when we proposed the book, because we didn't have any contributions from Netherlands or Denmark. And we were suggested that we should include one of the examples, because they are the key models. So that's it's this kind of almost permanent insistence that we should be referring to the ideas, the key examples of how cycling works. Whether this works for other places, or theories, for instance, do the theories of socio-technical transition actually can be applied? They were born in, again, in Dutch context. Can they really be applied in China or India? We have tried this in our project on electric bikes in China, and it's actually a lot about politics of the socio-technical transitions that is being left out. But still, it's one of the most popular heuristics in discussing mobility transitions. Yes, and the language, I think also we have some interesting chapters with where the languages, for instance, feminine velonomy, also this deroading concept by Nicolas Scott, many other things actually. I think we also we try to accommodate this different language, maybe not reinventing it ourselves, but allowing for this space to happen in the book. So yes, and that's kind of my summary for the comments. And thank you very much for these interesting visual interventions as well. Now I have never seen this picture of John Lennon actually with this bicycle on the bed, like a kind of pet, a bicycle as a pet. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dennis. I think I would like to say a couple of things myself as well, even though I was trying to be the main host as well, and didn't manage to take as many notes as Dennis has possibly taken. I think what I would like to reflect on is on what has been discussed so far in relation to cycling, but I would take this a bit forward into my current areas of research, which are very much focusing on using bicycle as a tool, not necessarily to go to work, but actually to work, and how the bicycle has been incorporated in the gig economy, and more generally within this platform capitalism that we see today in many cities across the world. So the gig economy is indeed one such instance where a lot of people are using bikes to do food deliveries. You are all too familiar with the likes of Uber or Deliveroo or Glovo. I am currently here in Romania doing research on Glovo and this food platform that operates across borders, but also as part of this integration of cycling in platform capitalism, the dockless bike sharing system, which at least up until a few years ago, they were thought to represent the future of bike sharing indeed. And I think there's a couple of links I would like to make here by focusing on these uses of cycling for various and indeed contested futures that Esther has made reference to, the utopias and dystopias, because indeed we can argue with the cycling we see increasing with this bike sharing system, dockless bike sharing system popping up in many cities, or indeed with so many couriers doing deliveries on bikes, that this is a kind of a good sign for our cycling futures, and allowing more people to access the city for various purposes, be they for commuting or indeed for earning some extra money, as these platforms like to frame the debate around platform food deliveries. On the other hand, what is happening here is the way in which this work, because both with people using the dockless bike sharing systems, but also the people who are doing deliveries, is a particular type of work which indeed is not being remunerated by any of these platforms. On the contrary, what happens with this data is that new systems of exploitations are put in place. So I think my reflection here is in relation to the utopian, dystopian kind of futures and innovations that we see indeed with cycling, that my research currently is trying to unpack and oftentimes contradicting what is visions of more cycling necessarily a good thing when it's not necessarily the case, because we see how these practices are indeed incorporated by these platforms for very, very business-oriented purposes, rather than making cycling a diverse and indeed inclusive practice for everyone in the city. So this is my current research. This is my kind of answer to some of the points that were made in the comments from Esther and Marco, and probably we would like now to hear from the rest of the participants in the event today, if they wanted to ask either the contributors or indeed ourselves, the editors, either commenting or indeed asking questions about our edited book.